Hey, what's up, everybody? Been a while since I posted a video, but beautiful day today out at the park, and figure it's a good time to do it. So we'll get right to it. So today I want to talk about drills. It's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. Recently read through Gerard Mock's book on sprinting. For those of you who don't know, he was Charlie Francis' predecessor, and he's really responsible for developing the A skip and the B skip, which almost every sprinter uses. So pretty valuable information. Really, I would say the main thing that Mock emphasized was rhythm and relaxation. If you can't do the drills with relaxation, how are you going to sprint with relaxation, right? You're forming your habits in drills, and it's a good way of breaking things down into their fundamental components so that you can eventually perfect the whole system. It also gives you opportunities to, have the energy to do repetition after repetition. If you're doing your drills relaxed and rhythmic, then you're probably not going to tighten up or, wear yourself out. Whereas sprinting, you only have so many repetitions a session where you can actually go out and, sprint near max speed, right? So, yeah, rhythm relaxation. If you can't do it in a drill, how are you going to do it in sprinting? And the way I see it, we we can break things down into, like, it's almost like the times tables, I would say. Drills are like the times tables, but sprinting is a lot more like, it's like algebra, or the equations that you've put it all together to. So yeah, there's a lot of value in it, and I think that sometimes the problem that people understand is that, drills are drills, and they don't replicate sprinting. You can work on some components, but it's never going to be truly, 100% the same thing. So it's important to keep that in mind. So starting off with, like, the A's, a lot of people call them high knees, but Mock called them running A's, and that's what I've called them. And one of the reasons I like calling them that is because you say high knees, a lot of times athletes, they get their knee as high as possible, and that's not what the purpose of the drill really is. So when I'm looking at the A's, it's really, you could just march them. You don't even have to skip them, or you don't even have to do the running at first, especially early in the year, or if you're working with a brand new beginner. Often I think it's better to just have them, like, even just march through the positions, right? Just walk through them, march through them, what they're supposed to look like, what they're supposed to feel like, and then you can progress into the skipping, into the running versions. But a lot of times people shift their emphasis, or they have their emphasis coached into them to lift the knee, and I don't think that that's really the most effective way of doing it, because a lot of times you can lift the knee, but what ends up happening, sometimes the foot drifts forward. Sometimes the emphasis is on the foot going, forward. And I think that it's a lot better to actually shift the emphasis to the foot. So I'm picking the foot up and down, and that keeps me in this piston-like position. Whereas I could lift the knee, and again, maybe the foot will be in front, or the foot could be too far behind as well. And so I'm not really doing a great job getting into those piston-like front-side mechanics that running A's are working on. Also, I would say that, again, drills are drills. The running A is designed really to focus on the piston-like acceleration front-side mechanics. You're not really working on extending your hip back, right? You're just working on this part, one part at a time. So why don't we apply the same thing to butt kicks? A lot of people today, a lot of coaches I see, they don't want people doing the traditional, bum kick where it's up and back like that, where you're just focusing on knee flexion. What they want to do is, a lot of times they'll add in, hip flexion, and you're doing this. But again, it's not actual sprinting, so why would we want to combine too many components at once? I think there's nothing wrong with focusing on just a traditional butt kick. I don't think everybody needs to do, this modernized version of it. Because again, you could do this, but guess what? You're still not getting the full hip extension, right? You're still not actually putting the full thing together like a sprint action. You can't, because you're doing drills, you're not sprinting, right? So again, I see nothing wrong with isolating each component like that. And I think that that is something that, you know, people feel like they have to do something that's more complex to get results, and I don't think you need to do that. It's not to say I would never use that variation of butt kicks. I used to use them quite frequently, actually, but I no longer see the value in it. If I have, like, you know, if I got 30 or 40 kids in front of me, you know, it doesn't even make sense to like get into very specific drills unless I identify a specific problem with that person. I've been working with them a long enough time. I think general instruction, there's nothing wrong with going traditional here. So that's most of what I would say about, you know, your A skips and your running A's, is that there's nothing wrong with that. The other thing that I see is people try to get very specific and switch in the air. They try to make it so much like sprinting. They'll, you know, instead of really like, it's like your traditional A skip, up and down, right? Up and down, up and down. But a lot of times they'll be doing this A switch. And I'm not saying there's no value in it. Again, I used to do these a lot, but I no longer really program them in general for people. Maybe there's individual cases where somebody might benefit, but for the most part, I don't think that you need to. But it's where you kind of start up here and you switch, you switch, you switch, you switch. The goal for that, for those types of drills that people do, they try to switch in the air. But in my opinion, you're not sprinting. You don't have enough hip height or air time to effectively switch in the air the same way that you would in an actual sprint. So I don't see the purpose of switching in the air. You're kind of muscling things, you're forcing things, and then you lose relaxation because you're forcing yourself to get back to the ground. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is a lot of times if you look at when somebody's doing these switches, the foot is out in front and there's so much of this horizontal stuff going on, and their hips will probably drop a little bit because of it, right? Because they're focused on the horizontal. And so they're going forward and backward with the foot instead of just keeping it more up and down. So I think that could lead to problems. More problems than it solves in some cases, right? So you have to be careful with programming very specific drills, and you're combining stuff, and you're trying to make it too much like sprinting. With the B skip, you know, again, you could always have kids walk them out and just do the marches. So like a marching B, right? You're extending the leg and bringing it back under. Now, a lot of people are going to say that, you know, your hips are dropping during that drill and that you're reaching too much and that you're pulling. And it can be the case for sure, but just because you do it traditionally doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. You know, I mean, I've seen people do them good traditionally or bad traditionally. And I've seen people benefit maybe from doing them with a more modernized step over version, switch in the air version. And sometimes it's not so good. More often than not, people will do the B switch these days, and they'll, you know, go from, it's very similar to the A switch, but they usually don't have a lot of kick out, as you can see. Like I don't have a lot of kick out there. And I'm not saying you should try to kick out as much as possible, but I think sometimes people are cutting off, you know, the range of motion that would naturally just kind of flow from their leg. I think at the end of the day, again, we're just focusing on the front side whipping action of that leg. I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, allowing yourself a little bit extra kick. It's not necessarily going to drop your hips if you're doing it correctly, and if the athlete has, you know, the strength levels to handle it. But there's nothing wrong with just the traditional. You know, you're more relaxed when you're doing it traditionally. You're not forcing yourself to try to land back under you. It should naturally land back under you. If it's not, then you are probably reaching too much. So there's definitely some coaching involved in it, right? And you got to use your eye. But at the end of the day, I don't think most people are getting detrimental results from doing the drills in a traditional manner. And, you know, at the end of the day, again, we're focusing on individual components one at a time. You know, the A's kind of focus on the front side. The butt kicks focus on some of the backside stuff and the recovery action. And the B is more so when you're cycling at top speed and you get maybe a little bit of that extra outward extension coming back. At the end of the day, the foot, the speed of the foot, the speed of the leg coming back down to the ground, if you can have a nice long lever and extend it back down to the ground powerfully, that is what good sprinting is. So not saying that I've never seen excessive kick out, but there is value in these drills. And so it's a lot of times how you do them, but traditionally, I don't think that you're gonna go too far wrong with it. So in summary, keeping your drills up and down. Another aspect I would say is to emphasize a little bit the down action than the up action, which sounds kind of obvious, but I think it's important to state because some people will overlift too much. No matter if it's an A or a B, they're focused on the upward portion too much when there should probably be a slight emphasis down. So the foot going down, the leg extending downward, there should be a little bit more emphasis on the down action than the up action. So that's one aspect, focusing on the foot rather than the knee. I think that there's a lot of other things you could talk about. You know, a lot of people talk about posture. I think that's pretty obvious, so I'm not going to spend several minutes on that. Yeah, so those are really important, staying relaxed. And at the end of the day, like I said, it's not that I would never use some of these other variations of drills, but I just don't find them often very necessary. I mean, somebody could have really good running drills and then it doesn't translate to their running form, you know, and then maybe you start tinkering with that, right? Sometimes people don't have very good drills, but then they go out and they run just fine. So, you know, at that point, you know, you're really just programming it into the warm-up. How much are you going to gain by changing it? So these are all coaching decisions you have to make on an individual case-by-case basis. But at the end of the day, I see nothing wrong with just going back to the roots of things, finding out why things were developed, how they were developed, what's the reasoning behind that. And you know, when you focus on rhythm and relaxation in your drills, and you focus on the fundamentals, right? Focus on the basics, you know, one thing at a time. Then at the end of the day, I think you'll get pretty good results from that. So, you know, I think my view is always, there's always evolution with things, right? You always kind of question things and you tinker with things and you change things around. I used to do a lot more of the progressive, modernized version of these drills, but I've found over the years that they're not actually as necessary. They're really not as beneficial as a lot of people think they are. I don't think they're necessary, especially when we're talking about generally working with a group of people. But yeah, if you have any questions, you know, go ahead and drop a comment, whatever. I didn't cover arm action, but I would say that it's pretty similar to the leg action. You don't want to focus too much again on the horizontal action. It's not saying I would never work on that with somebody, because different people respond to different cues, and cues have a shelf life. You know, one cue might work for you at one period of time compared to another based on your experience and strength and what you've been doing lately, or if you've been through an injury, whatever. But generally speaking, it's the same thing with the legs. With the arms is like, you know, you don't want to overemphasize too much of the forward backward stuff. You want to keep most things vertical. At the end of the day, we know that vertical force is really the strongest correlator to speed, right? The fastest people in the world have the highest vertical forces. So you want to keep things nice and taut. You want to have that extension throughout your body. That goes along with, again, the posture thing. Could always talk about like arm action for another 10 minutes or so, but I think we've covered a lot already, and this is a good starting point. So if there's anything else you want me to cover, let me know. Appreciate everybody who takes the time to watch these videos. So have a good one. Have fun sprinting. Take care.